Hi everyone, Stepan here. In this middle game video I'm going to talk about candidate moves and an efficient way of finding the correct candidate moves. Now I've already done a video on calculation, which is stage 2 of this process, and before you start calculating you need to limit yourself to a specific number of candidate moves, otherwise you are going to find yourself wasting too much time during a game, thinking vaguely and basically wasting your time for nothing. The first stage of the process is to find specific candidate moves which you are then going to devote your time to calculating, and that way you are going to spend time on the clock efficiently, and hopefully you won't miss too many chances during a game. I have divided the process of finding candidate moves into 5 steps, and with these 5 steps I've tried to cover every single blunder you could do. And I found that when I'm concentrated enough to follow this process, and sometimes when it's stressful during the game I'm not, when I am, I find that I play better moves. So let's get going. The first thing you should always look for when finding candidate moves is, does your opponent threaten anything immediately, or are there any immediate threats which you need to address? And that will change from move to move, so you can't really look for candidate moves before your opponent has made a move. Generally you can, but often that will lead to blunders, because you might find an idea which seems reasonable and it might be the best idea. However, after your opponent's next move it might be horrible and just simply lose. So my first piece of advice and the first step to finding good candidate moves would be to think about whether there are any defenses needed right away. So in this example position, my opponent just played a5, not my opponent, this is a game, but the player with the black pieces just played a5. So my first question is, are there any immediate threats? What if I play a stupid move? And I always, during a game, try to imagine, what if I played something ridiculous? Let's say I play g3. Is my opponent threatening anything? He could take my bishop, so let's say knight takes a3. And after rook takes a3, probably a4 or something like that, expanding on the queen side. Now, do I really want to give up my bishop? It has this annoying pin going on. On the other hand, the knight is still here and the knight is too passive and I'm not really threatening to take it. The knight can't move to f5 when the bishop is on a3 though, so the bishop is very valuable. If the rook moves to get away from the pin, then the f7 pawn is hanging, so I would say that my bishop is pretty useful, and you could argue whether it's better than the c4 knight, but I wouldn't say that this is such a great danger that I have to look out for it. So then I would go, okay, if I play g3, is there anything better that my opponent can do? Did a5 create any more dangerous threats? b5 should be looked at, but b5 isn't really that strong. Perhaps knight takes d2. After knight takes d2 I would probably take with my king, so I don't think that's such a huge threat. Is there anything else? Knight to f5, giving up the exchange. I think I would just take it. I'm not sure there's too much there. So I guess there aren't no immediate threats, so I could go to step 2. The second stage is look for forcing moves first. Checks, captures and forcing moves, because those are the moves that your opponent will have to react to immediately, and you could either gain time or just put him under too much pressure. So the next step, look for checks, then look for captures, and then look for forcing moves. Any checks here? I don't think so. I don't think there's a single check I could play, so now let's look for captures. The first capture which I have available is bishop takes e7. I'm sorry, let's get rid of g3. Bishop takes e7. Does that give me anything? King takes e7. I'm not sure. I think that the threat is stronger than the execution in this case, so bishop takes e7 might be a passive move. Another capture that I have is knight takes c4, which is definitely a candidate move, and this is in fact what was played in the game afterwards, because it either exchanges the queens or gives the queen a lot more scope, and sort of gives white a solid pawn chain here in the center with the opportunity of playing d5. So knight takes is definitely a threat. So let's see, are there any more captures? bishop takes c7, knight takes c4, rook takes. You should look at every capture. Trust me, because often you are going to miss stupid details. Rook takes f7 doesn't work in this case. Any more captures? Queen takes c4 doesn't work. I think that's it. Now forcing moves. Do I have any forcing moves? Forcing moves are moves that your opponent has to react to, but they don't capture anything and they don't put their king in check. So a forcing move, for example, would be, I don't know, knight into e4 if it was threatening, let's say, knight to f6 or knight to d6. In this case, it's bad. So let's look for any forcing moves which look logical. Any other forcing moves? I don't think so. This position is fairly straightforward, but I still wanted to give it as an example just so that you can see the thought process behind it. So you have no checks. You have two captures, one of which you don't really like. The other one is knight takes c4, definitely a valuable capture. You don't have any forcing moves. Now let's go on. Do I have any bad pieces? This stage is often going to be crucial because most players, especially on my level and below, weaker players, tend to forget about their pieces. In this position, your knight is okay, you might exchange it, your bishop is definitely fine, your rook on f3 is great, your queen is active, it could come into h7, it's controlling a lot of squares. Your rook on a1 isn't doing anything, so you would definitely like to improve that rook. However, ask yourself the same question: is my opponent threatening anything? If I move the rook, my a3 bishop is hanging, so you can't move that for the moment. But keep this rook in mind. Let's go on to stage 5. Can I provoke any weaknesses? For now, this can't really be done. Here I'm talking about positional long-term weaknesses, static weaknesses such as doubled pawns, isolated pawns, a backward pawn, or something in that respect. Some positional weakness which you could exploit throughout the game. Here I'm not sure there are any weaknesses you could create. You have some weaknesses to exploit though. The b6 pawn is weak. You could argue that the f7 pawn is weak because the rook is sort of trapped to defend it. So, but I don't think there are any candidate moves that could provoke weaknesses. So now let's take all of this into consideration and let's talk over that in our head. Is my opponent threatening anything? Not really. Even if I play a stupid move such as g3, one of the worst things that could happen is my opponent taking my a3 bishop and I'm not losing then. So I don't really have to be concerned. There is nothing that I need to address immediately. Are there any checks? No. Captures? Yes, two captures. I like knight takes c4. Bishop takes c7 is passive because the threat is stronger than the execution and my bishop is great on a3. On the other hand, knight takes c4 resolves the threat of the knight taking the bishop as well. So this seems like the most logical move. Do I have bad pieces? Yes, my rook on b1 is bad and I can't get it into the game because my bishop is hanging. My bishop is hanging because the knight is threatening to take the bishop, and if you go one step back, capturing on c4 will resolve that problem as well. So in this position there is only one candidate move, and I wanted to give this exact example because you will often come to a conclusion like this during the game, and very often you are going to find moves which are going to solve all of your troubles. So in this position, knight takes c4 is great. Yeah, I forgot one forcing move. I'm sorry. Let's go back to step 3. There is one more forcing move I didn't consider, and that's queen to h7, a forcing move which is now attacking the g7 pawn. However, there's a slight problem with this move, I think, because in any position where the queen comes to h7 and the knight comes into f5 defending the pawn, then the rook on h8 is threatening the queen. So my opponent might continue with taking my bishop to make sure he can play knight to f5. So bishop, knight takes, rook takes, knight to f5 defending the g7 pawn and now threatening to trap my queen. And I think I will have to play rook takes f5, e takes f5, and now queen takes f5 check, king to c7. I'm down the exchange, I'm losing this position, so the forcing move queen h7 doesn't really work. So let's go back. We've been over all the possibilities, and those have been candidate moves for a while. Queen to h7 was a candidate move in our head, but we discarded it before we went into calculation. That's the most important thing. You now coming into the last step, how many candidates do I have? This is the most important thing, because you need to be aware of how many variations you are going to be calculating. And very often, if you just vaguely think, okay, queen h7 is a move, bishop e7 is a move, and then you start calculating, you are going to waste much more time than had you discarded the moves earlier. And you don't really have to calculate to discard queen to h7, because it's fairly logical. Queen h7, he takes, I take, he plays knight to f5, I have to react, I have to give up my exchange, there's nothing else to do, otherwise I'm losing my queen. So this isn't really calculation, this is just thinking. And you can often do that before deciding on the candidate moves. So now with these 5 simple steps, we've come to a conclusion that we have only one candidate move. And now we only really have to calculate that one. Even though you have one candidate move, you still need to calculate, because there could be a mistake lurking somewhere. And it might turn out that even though it's resolving all of your issues, it's a bad move, and you might really have to play a move such as g3 just to waste time. But we'll get to that. So knight takes c4. Now let's calculate. If I take on c4, he can take with the queen, he can take with the bishop. Taking with the queen, I'm not sure is that good. I might play queen h7, I might just take. In this position I think I'm fine, and I believe it will be better for me, because I can exploit the b6 weakness. I still have pressure on f7, I still have this pin, and I think all 3 of my pieces are better than all of black's pieces. I might even consider a move such as g4, just making sure that this knight only has 1 square. So okay, I'm not really worried about queen takes c4. So after a5, knight takes c4, I think my opponent is going to play d takes c4, simply keeping the queens on the board, because it gives him many more chances. And now let's look at the queen h7 idea once again. Now we already have to restart the process. What is my opponent threatening? Let's go. My opponent is threatening to take my queen, so this time it's a really serious threat. If I play the move g3, always find the worst move on the board. If I play g3, he's going to capture my queen, so I need to react. Checks, captures, forcing moves. I don't have any checks. That's clear enough, I think. Captures, I can capture on c4, losing my queen. That's no good. I can capture on f7, losing my queen. That's no good. Can I capture anything else? I can capture on e7. That's no good. Okay, any forcing moves? There's the forcing move I see, and that's the move d5, and you should often look for that. When you have to defend, there's often an attacking response instead of the defensive move. So instead of moving your queen somewhere, perhaps you can consider the move d5. Now let's try to calculate that. d5, a forcing move. This is definitely a candidate. What would happen? Firstly, I think that if c takes d3, I'm winning, because c d3, dc6, he has to take with the knight, otherwise his knight is hanging. Knight takes, and now I can just take the rook. No, I can first take with check here. Rook takes here, check. King somewhere, king c7, and I can take the rook. So this position is definitely winning. So d5, one variation works. This is going to be a candidate. So now let's move on. Let's find the other candidates before calculating too deeply. After dc4, d5 is definitely a candidate, and we found it because we were looking for forcing moves. This is a forcing move because it attacks the queen. Do I have any other forcing moves? I have a forcing move, queen to h7. It's attacking the g7 pawn. Now, the thing we have to calculate once again is knight f5 and rook to h8, but we will get to that. Queen to h7 is definitely a candidate. Let's go back. Any other forcing moves? I don't think so. Rook to b1. No, not really. There aren't any other forcing moves. Do I have any bad pieces? Yes, I have my rook on b1, but I don't have time to improve it because my queen is hanging. Weaknesses, I can't provoke any because my queen is hanging. So we have two candidates. Stage 5, two candidates. What were our candidates? The move d5 and the move queen to h7. We have passive defenses as well. We could try a move such as queen to e3, I guess. We could also play queen to d2. Okay, let's go over queen to d2. If queen to d2, I guess f5 is a good idea to make sure he doesn't allow me to enter the h7 square. But after ef5 en passant, ef6 en passant. Okay, let's see. f5, e takes f6. rook takes f6, getting rid of the pin, rook takes, g takes, I'm winning the h pawn. So okay, I have another candidate, queen to d2, definitely, okay. So let's go back. There's queen to d2, keeping pressure on the h6 pawn, and we will see if my opponent doesn't play f5, what do I do then? So one of my moves is queen to d2, another one is queen to h7, and another one is d5. And here you have your three candidate moves. Now, for stage 2, for calculation, you can watch the video I made on how to calculate variations. I'm not going to go into that over here. I just wanted to go over these 5 steps. But this is a fairly easy process to follow, and if you follow it on each and every move, don't think that you're wasting time. You're not. It's on the contrary, you're saving yourself time which you would lose on incoherent thoughts of general aspects of the position. So this is a very effective way to calculate, to choose candidate moves. I just want to show you one more position. This is actually from the opening. This is my favorite opening, the Karpov variation of the Caro-Kann. The game was played between Kasparov and Anand. Anand had the black pieces here. And in this position, you need to choose a thematic break for black. And if you play the Caro-Kann, then you know that at some point you either break with c5 or with e5. So at this stage, it's much easier to find candidate moves. You already have these two. But even during the opening, if you're not completely sure what the move order is, this is move 13, and if you're not completely sure, take the same approach. Do the 5 steps. What is my opponent threatening here? What is Garry Kasparov threatening here? If I play the worst move, let's say I play, I don't know, king to f8. Are there any immediate threats? I don't like knight to c4, but this is actually a serious threat, I think, because if I have to move my bishop, and I will want to move my bishop, then bishop to f4, and my position is horrible. So I actually have a threat to address. So after queen to f3, if I play the worst move, knight c4 is coming, my bishop moves, bishop to f4 is coming, and my position is just dead. So I have to react. If knight to c4 is a threat, I will still do the following steps, the next 4 steps, but I will keep that in mind. Do I have any checks, captures, or forcing moves? I don't have any checks. I can capture the h2 pawn, but that definitely loses. Forcing moves, I'm not sure I have any forcing or attacking moves. Okay, so let's go on. Do I have bad pieces? Yes, I do have bad pieces. My bishop on c8, my rook on a8, my rook on g8 is fine, I would say. Can I provoke any weaknesses? No, I can't. So yeah, let's take the 2 crucial things into consideration. My opponent is threatening something. He's threatening knight to c4. And I have bad pieces. I have a bad bishop on c8. I have a bad rook on a8. So how do I solve both the problems? In this position, I would have... I would look at 3 different candidate moves. One of them would be discarded fast, and that would be bishop to d7, because I'm tempted to castle long, but after bishop d7, knight c4, and if I castle, he's going to take, I think. So I'm not really happy about this position. Yeah, I don't like this position, so I'm discarding bishop to d7 immediately. So I would look at 2 moves. 2 moves that resolve the problem I have in the position. Resolving the bishop and not really stopping knight to c4, but not giving white time to play knight to c4. One of these moves would be e5, breaking in the center, and the other would be c5, breaking on the other side. So let's calculate c5. c5, d takes c5, bishop takes c5. I'm happy. White is probably going to castle, so c5 is definitely a candidate. If e5, d takes c5, bishop takes c5, he can play knight to c4 here. But yeah, I could just ignore that and develop, let's say, bishop to e6. So this is definitely a candidate. Now, stage 5, how many candidates do I have? I have e5, I have c5. Now you start calculating. You need to go through all of these steps regardless of the position, regardless of whether it's the late opening, the middle game, or the end game. If you don't know the exact move which you should play, go through these 5 steps and you're going to be able to find the correct candidate moves. Once again, if you need stage 2 of this process, go to my video on calculation. I will link it in the description below. And let me know what you think. Thanks very much for watching. I'm glad you liked the video, and stay tuned for more chess. Good luck finding your candidate moves. Bye bye.